Earth's rise to power began in silence. The first test of the new technology took place in the far reaches of the Helios system, a region once ruled by the Zorethians, an alien race known for their ruthless military. The humans had no idea that their test would unleash a force that would forever alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The experiment was meant to be a simple demonstration of the new energy technology discovered deep within the ruins of a forgotten world. It was supposed to be a minor breakthrough, but no one anticipated the magnitude of its impact. Within minutes of activation, the human fleet watched in awe as Zorethian warships began to malfunction. Their weapons systems went offline one by one. Their engines sputtered and died, leaving them vulnerable to a fleet of ships that had no idea what they were capable of. What followed was a spectacle of confusion. The Zorethian ships drifted like helpless hulks in the dark expanse of space. The human commanders were initially hesitant, unsure of whether this was a trap or some form of alien trick. But as time went on, it became clear that the Zorethians were powerless. No matter what they tried, the humans had control over their most advanced technology. The galaxy's most feared empire had been completely neutralized without a single shot being fired. The news spread like wildfire across the stars. The Zorethians were forced to surrender their territory in the Helios system. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Earth was now a force to be reckoned with, and everyone from the Excelnar to the Eterians understood what that meant. They had witnessed humanity's unassuming rise to power, and the implications were undeniable. The galaxy was used to seeing humans as a chaotic, unpredictable species lacking the discipline and technology of more advanced races. But now Earth had something more dangerous than just weapons. They had the ability to neutralize the galaxy's strongest forces without ever revealing their true hand. Earth's new technology was a game changer. It was the kind of power no one had expected, and no one was ready for. With the Zorethians in retreat, Earth began to grow in influence. Its leaders knew that this was their moment. They wasted no time in using their newfound position to start reshaping the galactic order behind closed doors. Diplomats were sent to every corner of the galaxy to form alliances and assert Earth's intentions. They weren't just there to negotiate, they were there to change everything. But not everyone was willing to bend the knee to Earth's demands. Many of the galaxy's older empires saw this as a challenge to their long-held authority. The Galactic Council convened in secret to discuss how to address this new threat. In their eyes, humanity had crossed a line, and now they would need to act swiftly to curtail Earth's rising dominance. The power dynamics were shifting, and for the first time in millennia, the galaxy was uncertain of its future. At the heart of Earth's rise was a new generation of leaders who had never known a world where they weren't the underdog. The idea of submitting to alien overlords was anathema to them. They were determined to carve their own place in the galaxy, and if the universe didn't like it, then they would make them. The stage was set. The galaxy would never be the same again, and as Earth's fleet made its first forays into deep space to assert its dominance, one thing was clear: they would either conform to Earth's new laws or face extinction. The Galactic Council convened in a vast chamber deep within the heart of the Eterian homeworld, where representatives from dozens of alien species had gathered to discuss Earth's sudden rise to power. The mood was tense. The once secure order of the galaxy now felt precarious. Every species knew that Earth had disrupted the balance, and the question on everyone's mind was how to respond. The council's chairman, a tall and regal Zorethian named Inrith, stepped forward, his skin rippling with the faint light of his people's bioluminescence. His voice cold and firm, he began speaking of Earth's actions in the Helios system as a direct threat to the security of the galaxy. The Zorethians had always prided themselves on being the dominant military force, but now they were humbled, their ships dismantled without explanation. Enrith spoke of how Earth had demonstrated an unprovoked superiority that no one could ignore, and how the time had come to end Earth's dangerous rise before it spiraled further out of control. The room was filled with murmurs as the representatives of other species whispered among themselves. The Eterians, with their ability to read minds, sat motionless, their expressions unreadable, but their thoughts clearly communicated to one another. Their council leader, Tara, was already considering the implications of this new power, and what Earth's potential could mean for the telepathic species. The psychic discipline had long been their way of ruling the galaxy. Manipulating other minds was a skill they used both to control their own people and to subjugate weaker species, but now they faced a challenge no telepathic technique could ever overcome: technology that could shut down their abilities without so much as a thought. In the back of the room, the Excelnar, a race known for their cunning and subterfuge, watched with silent calculation. Their species had always relied on their intelligence and covert operations to maintain power. Their spies were unmatched, their assassins legendary, but Earth's new weapon threatened to expose them all. They knew that the galaxy was changing, and they would need to act quickly or risk being left behind. Soon the council erupted into heated debate. The Zorathians demanded a military response immediately. Their fleets would launch an assault on Earth's homeworld and force humanity back into submission. The Utirians suggested a more subtle approach, using psychic manipulation to turn Earth's own leaders against them, while the Excelnar favored sowing chaos through espionage and covert actions. Each species had its own view on how to handle Earth's rise, and the council descended into arguments as each representative sought to push their own agenda. But there was one voice among the chaos that called for calm, a voice that cut through the noise with surprising clarity. Jareth, a high-ranking Utirian's counselor, known for his calm demeanor and sharp intellect, spoke up. He had been present during the first wave of humanity's rise and had witnessed Earth's actions with a growing sense of concern and admiration. Jareth proposed an alternative. He suggested that the council avoid immediate conflict with Earth and instead open diplomatic channels to understand their true intentions. He believed that humanity's technological leap might be the beginning of something greater than just power. He proposed that Earth could be an ally rather than an enemy, but this idea was met with scorn. The council was divided. Some agreed with Jareth's cautious approach, others saw him as naive and foolish. But one thing was certain: the conversation would not end here. The galaxy was on the brink of war or peace, depending on the outcome of the next few days, as Earth's new power had shaken the very foundation of everything they knew. The next day, Earth made its move. The announcement came over every frequency across the galaxy, a simple message transmitted from Earth's capital world. A peaceful voice from the human envoy echoed through the cosmos. "We are the Earth Federation, and we hereby establish the Galactic Order. All species within this galaxy are now subject to the laws we have created, and those who do not comply will face the consequences." The message was clear, and it sent ripples of shock throughout the galaxy as each species realized that Earth had no intention of backing down. The first decree of Earth's new galactic order was swift and unsettling: the cessation of all genetic modifications across the galaxy. For centuries, many alien races had relied on the art of genetic engineering to enhance themselves, to adapt to harsh environments, or to gain advantages in combat. The Cerinthians, in particular, had mastered the art of self-improvement. Their species had long since abandoned the frailty of nature, choosing instead to shape their future through genetic manipulation. It was this very practice that had propelled them to power and ensured their place at the top of the galactic food chain. But now Earth was demanding that they stop. It was an unprecedented move. To some, it was an outrageous overreach. To others, it was a challenge to the natural order itself. For the Cerinthians, the law was a direct assault on everything they had built. Their species' identity was tied to their advancements in genetic engineering, and now they were being told to abandon it. Alfar, the Cerinthian leader, stood before his council, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. How could Earth impose such a law? He demanded to know what made them think they could dictate terms to other species. The Cerinthians had long been known for their strength, their intelligence, and their resilience. But now they were faced with a reality they had never imagined. They were being forced to give up their greatest advantage. Meanwhile, on Earth, the diplomats and military leaders were preparing for the fallout. The new laws would not be easy to enforce, and they knew that resistance would come swiftly. Earth had known it would be a tough sell, but they had calculated that their newfound technological superiority would give them the leverage needed to push through their vision for the galaxy. They were no longer just a fragile planet on the edge of the universe. They were a force to be reckoned with, and if the galaxy wanted to survive, they would have to accept Earth's new reality. As the days passed, the reactions from other species poured in. Some argued that the genetic modification ban was a violation of their rights. Others rallied behind Earth's vision, hoping that the new order could bring peace and stability to a galaxy that had long been mired in conflict. The Galactic Council was left in turmoil as factions began to fracture, with each species forced to choose between standing with Earth or defying it. The Cerinthians were not alone in their defiance. The Eterians and the Excelnar quickly joined their ranks, forming a coalition against Earth's laws. They believed that by combining their resources they could overthrow Earth's growing power and restore the old order. But even as the seeds of rebellion were sown, there was something stirring in the shadows, something far more dangerous than any of them realized. Earth's laws were just the beginning, and no one could have predicted the far-reaching consequences that would follow. The galaxy was on the verge of a new era, one way or another, but the outcome was still uncertain, and the only thing certain now was that war or peace would come on Earth's terms. The days following Earth's announcement were filled with an eerie tension as the galaxy's most powerful species wrestled with the implications of Earth's new laws. Some factions chose to comply, others began to prepare for war. But it was the Cerinthians who felt the sting of the first decree most acutely. Their leaders convened in private chambers, their minds racing with possibilities of how to respond to this affront to their way of life. Althar stood before the council, his mind weighed down by the impossible decision they now faced. If they resisted Earth openly, they risked complete annihilation. If they complied, they would lose everything they had worked for. Their very identity would be shattered. For centuries, the Cerinthians had perfected their genetic enhancements. Their ability to alter their biology had given them the edge over other species. In every conflict they had faced, their soldiers were stronger, faster, more resilient than any other in the galaxy. They had once used their advanced genetics to dominate their rivals, but now they were being asked to abandon it all in a single stroke. The very thing that had made them formidable was being stripped away, and with it their confidence, their strength, and their legacy. Althar could feel the weight of his people's anger pressing in on him, their eyes seething with resentment. He could hear their cries for defiance growing louder with each passing day. But he also understood the reality of their situation. Earth was not a species to be taken lightly. They had proven that with the Zorathians. The very foundation of galactic power had shifted, and Althar knew that if they refused to comply, Earth would show no mercy. The Cerinthian Council had to make a choice. Either they would find a way to secretly defy Earth's orders, or they would accept their fate and begin the painful process of purging their advancements in genetic engineering. It was a decision that would shape the future of their species forever, and in the end, it was Althar who stood alone in the silence of the room and made the hardest decision of his life. In a somber voice, he spoke to the council. The Cerinthians would comply with Earth's first law. They would no longer pursue genetic modifications. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Althar knew it was the only way to preserve their future. They would adapt, they would evolve, but not through the methods they had once relied on. Across the galaxy, other species watched with bated breath. Some were relieved, others were enraged, and some remained uncertain. But the truth was clear: Earth's laws were being enforced with a ruthlessness that no one had anticipated. The Eterians, the telepathic race whose minds were their greatest weapon, could feel the growing unease within their ranks. They had long used their abilities to manipulate entire civilizations, bending them to their will, but now they too faced the reality that their powers might one day be nullified by Earth's technology. Their leader Terah sat in his council chambers deep within the heart of their homeworld, his mind struggling with the possibilities that loomed ahead. Their greatest strength was their psychic abilities, and the very thought of losing them was almost too much to bear. The Eterians had been the dominant force in the galaxy for millennia, but with Earth's sudden rise to power, they were now faced with the terrifying prospect of becoming obsolete. Their place at the top of the galactic order was no longer guaranteed. Terah turned to his fellow counselors, each of them haunted by the same fear, the fear of losing everything, the fear of being dethroned by a species they had once viewed as insignificant. The Eterians had been the architects of so much of the galaxy's history, and now they were facing the unthinkable, a future where they might be forced to give up their most prized possession, their ability to control minds. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone could comprehend, and the real question now was not whether Earth's laws would be obeyed, but how much the galaxy was willing to sacrifice in order to resist the tide of Earth's dominance. As the galaxy teetered on the brink of chaos, the tensions that had been simmering for weeks finally reached a boiling point. The Cerinthians reluctantly agreed to comply with Earth's decree, but their submission was not without deep resentment. Whispers of rebellion began to spread among the alien factions who had yet to fully bend the knee to humanity's new laws. The Eterians and the XLNR were not so easily swayed by Earth's demands. Their pride and their power could not be so easily cast aside, and it was in the shadows of this discontent that the first signs of open resistance began to take shape. The Galactic Council remained fractured. Each race was now faced with a terrible decision: follow Earth's laws or face the consequences. The Cerinthians had chosen compliance, but many others were not so certain, and the seeds of rebellion were planted across the stars. The XLNR, whose entire existence was built upon subterfuge and manipulation, began quietly assembling a coalition of like-minded species, those who refused to be dictated to by Earth's aggressive overreach. They promised power and protection to any race that would join them in defiance of humanity's demands. And though many remained hesitant, a growing number of species began to rally under their banner. The XLNR understood that Earth's newfound power was a direct threat to their ability to maintain control over their covert operations. If Earth could disable their ships and neutralize their intelligence networks, they would lose everything they had spent centuries building. The Eterians, too, were preparing for what they knew would be an inevitable confrontation. Their leaders had already begun secret meetings with the most powerful factions in the galaxy to discuss the possibility of war. Terra, their leader, had been watching Earth's rise with a mix of fear and admiration, but he could not allow their species' greatest strength, their telepathic control, to be stripped away without a fight. The Eterians were determined to find a way to fight back. They had long considered themselves the true rulers of the galaxy, and the idea that a lesser species like Earth could dictate the terms of their existence was unthinkable. The Eterians began training new generations of warriors who would fight using their psychic abilities to resist Earth's dominance. They knew it would be a difficult war, one that might take years or even centuries to win, but they had no choice. They could not afford to lose their place at the top of the galactic hierarchy. As for Earth, their forces were stretched thin. Their new laws had created a complex web of resistance and compliance across the galaxy, and humanity found itself caught in a precarious position. Their fleet had already suffered significant losses in skirmishes with alien factions, but they had also gained valuable intelligence on the movements of their enemies. The human high command knew that time was running out, and that the galaxy's resistance was only growing stronger with each passing day. They also knew that the next few months would determine the future of their species in the stars, and so Earth's leaders prepared for what was to come. The final showdown between Earth and those who refused to comply with their laws was inevitable, but what they didn't know was that a new force was already making its way across the galaxy, a force far more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. As Earth's military forces prepared for the battles ahead, they also began to understand the truth that they were not the only ones with secrets in this galaxy, and the war they had started would be unlike anything they had imagined. It was a war that would not only shape the future of Earth, but also change the course of galactic history forever. Amid the chaos that was unfolding across the galaxy, a new figure emerged from the shadows, someone who had been operating in the background, and who had now become Earth's most unlikely ally. Lyanna Kale, a young diplomat and former soldier, had long been an advocate for peaceful negotiations, but after witnessing Earth's rise and the growing conflict around her, she understood that her role in this new world would not be one of diplomacy alone. She had always believed that humanity had the potential for greatness, but now she realized that the galaxy's future would depend on how they navigated this unprecedented crisis. Lyanna had seen firsthand the devastation that the war between Earth and the alien factions had caused. She had watched as once peaceful worlds were torn apart by the conflict, and she knew that something needed to change. But what shocked her more than anything was that the very species who were resisting Earth's new laws had much to gain from cooperating with humanity, and she was determined to find a way to bridge the divide between the warring factions. She began to devise a bold plan, one that would bring the galaxy to the negotiating table not through force, but through reason. She knew that the key to ending the war was to expose the truth behind Earth's rise to power and why they had imposed their new laws in the first place. The universe had only seen part of the story. They had not understood the forces that had shaped Earth's destiny, nor the true dangers that loomed on the horizon. Working in secret, she gathered a small group of Earth's most trusted diplomats and military officers together. They began to piece together the puzzle that had been hidden from the galaxy for so long. Earth's rise had not been an accident. It had been orchestrated by an ancient alien race who had long since vanished from the galaxy. Their technology had been found buried beneath the surface of Earth's homeworld, and it was their designs that had enabled humanity to leap forward in technology so quickly. But this discovery had also set in motion a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. Lyanna's plan was simple but dangerous. She would offer the galaxy's greatest powers a chance to see the truth for themselves and to join Earth in forging the new future, one that would not be dictated by fear and domination, but by cooperation and understanding. She knew it would not be easy. The alien races had already suffered too much at Earth's hands, and the scars of war ran deep. But if there was any chance of peace, it would have to come through transparency and trust. As she set her plan into motion, Lyanna found herself facing resistance, not only from the alien factions, but from within her own ranks. The military leaders who had once supported Earth's hardline stance were now growing increasingly disillusioned with the idea of diplomacy. They had come to believe that victory could only be achieved through force, and their growing animosity toward the aliens made it difficult to see a path toward peace. But Lyanna was resolute. She knew that if she failed, the galaxy would fall into a never-ending cycle of war and destruction, and she could not allow that to happen. With every step she faced opposition, but she also began to see small signs of hope. Some of the alien factions who had once been Earth's bitter enemies were now willing to listen to what she had to say. They too were beginning to understand that the status quo could not continue. Lyanna's voice was quiet but powerful. It cut through the noise of war and hatred, and as the galaxy watched Earth's leaders struggle to decide whether to pursue peace or war, it was her voice that began to shape the future of the galaxy. And for the first time in a long while, a fragile hope began to emerge that perhaps there was another way to avoid the total destruction that so many had feared. As Lyanna's efforts began to take shape, the reactions from both Earth and the Galactic Council were mixed. Some saw her as a visionary, others as a traitor to the cause. But despite the growing opposition, Lyanna pressed on. She had already secured private meetings with key figures in the galaxy, the ones who still believed that a peaceful resolution could be found even among the most resistant species. There were those who had started to question the path of war and domination. They were tired of endless conflict and the devastation it brought to their worlds. The Cerinthians, once proud of their genetic modifications, were among the first to listen. They had complied with Earth's laws under duress, but now they found themselves questioning if their submission was truly the right decision. The Cerinthian Council was deeply divided. Some still insisted that they could never align themselves with humans, while others saw an opportunity to find a new way forward, one that did not rely on their engineered strengths, but on collaboration and mutual respect. The message was clear. There were fractures within their society, fractures that could be exploited if Lyanna's peace initiative had any chance of succeeding. Meanwhile, the Eterians continued to plot their next moves in secret. Their psychic abilities had been rendered useless by Earth's technology, and they seethed with the humiliation of it all. Their leadership council was in turmoil as they debated whether to stand firm and resist, or find a way to adapt to the new reality. They too had suffered losses, but they were a patient race, and they knew how to wait for the right moment. But even among their ranks, there were whispers of those who sought another way, a way to preserve their pride while acknowledging Earth's growing power. It was a delicate balance, one that could tip the scales in favor of peace if handled correctly. The Xelnar were the wild card. They had long been known for their intelligence and manipulation. They had cultivated a reputation for working in the shadows and pulling strings from behind the scenes. But they too had begun to realize that Earth's influence was becoming too widespread to ignore. The Xelnar's underground networks had been severely impacted by Earth's technology. They could no longer operate with the same ease that had once made them the masters of espionage. Their spies had been neutralized, and their covert operations crippled for the first time in centuries. They found themselves vulnerable and exposed. The Xelnar knew that they could not continue down the same path of deceit forever. Back on Earth, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The military factions that had once supported the hardline approach were beginning to feel the pressure from within the ranks. As casualties mounted and resources dwindled, the hope for peace was slowly gaining traction even among those who had long been proponents of a more aggressive stance. They began to understand that a prolonged war with the galaxy's combined forces would lead to nothing but devastation and the ultimate collapse of Earth's position in the stars. Lyanna saw the growing support for her cause and knew that the time had come to make her move. She began to organize a grand summit, one that would bring together the most influential leaders from across the galaxy to discuss the future of their shared existence. It would not be easy to bring everyone to the table, but she had come to realize that it was the only way to break the cycle of violence and pave the way for a future built on cooperation rather than domination. As the summit loomed on the horizon, the tension in the galaxy reached its peak. Factions that had once been bitter enemies now found themselves at a crossroads. Would they embrace the possibility of peace, or would they choose the path of destruction? The galaxy stood on the edge of a new era, and the outcome of the summit would determine the fate of all life in the stars. The day of the summit arrived, and the galaxy held its breath. The great hall on Earth's capital world was filled with representatives from every corner of the universe. The room was a mix of tension and cautious optimism. Some species had sent their finest diplomats, others had sent warlords determined to secure their interests. No matter the cost. At the front of the room stood Lyanna Kale, a beacon of calm in the storm. Her mind was focused, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this moment would decide the fate of billions. She knew the stakes were higher than ever before, and that any misstep could lead to irreparable consequences. As the leaders took their seats, Lyanna opened the summit with a speech that resonated deep within the hearts of those present. She spoke not of power or dominance, but of survival and unity. She reminded them of the great civilizations that had come before them and the disasters that had torn them apart time and time again. She urged them to see beyond their differences, to look at the galaxy not as a battleground, but as a home for all species, and that home could only survive if they worked together. The room was quiet as Lyanna's words echoed through the chamber. For a moment, it seemed as though the weight of the galaxy's burden rested on her shoulders, and yet she felt the eyes of every delegate on her. But despite the gravity of the situation, she remained composed. Her vision for peace was a fragile one, but she was determined to see it through. The Cerinthians were the first to speak. Their leader, Althar, stood tall before the assembly, his once proud voice now tempered with uncertainty. He confessed that the Cerinthians had suffered deeply under Earth's laws, but they had come to realize that their species' future was not just in their genetics, but in their ability to adapt and grow as a people. Althar's admission was a small victory for Lyanna, but she knew that it would take more than words to convince the galaxy's other powers. The Eterians were next. Their leader, Taras, stood before the council, his psychic abilities neutralized by Earth's technology. His people had been humbled in a way they had never expected, but Taras did not come with threats. Instead, he spoke of the need for balance. He acknowledged Earth's power, but also expressed that the galaxy's future could not be dictated by one species alone. The Eterians were willing to negotiate. They would not fight for domination, but for respect and autonomy. The Xelnar were the hardest to sway. A representative, a tall and shadowed figure known only as Vren, had a reputation for secrecy and manipulation. They had long thrived in the shadows, but now Vren spoke of the need to work together with Earth and other species in order to preserve the fragile stability of the galaxy. The Xelnar were known for their cunning and their willingness to play both sides, But even they saw the writing on the wall. The galaxy could not survive if they continued to play games with each other. One by one, the leaders of the galaxy's most powerful species stood and expressed their willingness to seek peace and compromise. The tension that had once filled the room began to ebb away, and for the first time in a long while there was a flicker of hope that the galaxy could move beyond its cycle of war and hatred. By the time the summit ended, Lyanna's vision of peace was beginning to take form. The delegates had agreed to the formation of a new galactic council, one where all species would have a voice, and no single race would dominate over another. Earth's laws would still stand, but they would be subject to oversight and modification. As the council worked to ensure the balance of power was maintained, it was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. As the representatives left the summit hall, a sense of cautious optimism lingered in the air. The galaxy was far from healed, but it had taken its first step toward a new era, one where unity could be achieved not through conquest, but through understanding and cooperation. The galaxy had been forever changed, and Lyanna Kale knew that her work had only just begun, but for the first time in a long time she believed that peace was possible.